And welcome to everybody joining us on this call. Delighted to be able to present to UCC today about Fulbright opportunities for Irish applicants. And we're delighted as well to have Colin Bradley, Professor Colin Bradley, join us, and Colin will talk about activities and his experience with Fulbright at a later stage. Today, really what I want to do is not go through massive in-depth information, because a lot of that is actually available on the website and is available from further information we can supply. But it's really talk about Fulbright, why Fulbright, the generic main points of activity, what you might consider doing, and how to go about it and where to go next. So as I start the presentation, just bear that in mind, that if you have any specific questions, please do type them into the comments box and we will address them at the end. So a little bit about Fulbright. It's in its 75th year of operation, so that's quite a considerable time. It's a measure of success that it's, first of all, it's been so long in operation, and second of all, then that it's now in 180 countries around the world. When it was originally set up after the Second World War, it was done so on the basis that a lot of the awful things that had happened during the Second World War, Senator Fulbright, who started the program, who sought out the funding, post-war funding, felt that what happened during the Second World War, a lot of it was because people didn't understand each other, they didn't know each other. So he felt that the best way to deal with that kind of was through cultural engagement and through education, particularly as educators would be people who would be very influential in society and in their countries. Ireland joined the program in 1957, and the Fulbright Commission, as you see it now, was set up in 1991. There are 49 around the world, where one of them, the rest, operate out of posts or special offices that are managed by the US embassies globally. So this year is obviously a special year, it's a 75th year, and globally there are a lot of activities going on. Fulbright opportunities are really aimed for passionate and accomplished people, and that can be a piece of string, to be fair. You know, we're looking for students, we're looking for scholars, we're looking for artists, we're looking for teachers, we're looking for professionals. There may be another word there, that we are looking for you. We are interested in people, and it's really across all disciplines. We're interested that you might be able to research or study or teach or lecture in the USA. So this is very much about binational engagement with Ireland and the US and many countries around the world. But there's also a global aspect of Fulbright as well. What do we provide in terms of the awards? Well, the obvious is monetary grant. There is visa administration, which can be quite a considerable process in itself. Accident and emergency insurance when you're on your Fulbright award. Cultural and professional programming, that's a big part of what Fulbright is about, and sometimes it's a lot of the soft support. Both in Ireland and in the US this happens, and ongoing support and links to a global network of Fulbright alum. Once a Fulbrighter, always a Fulbrighter. It can be an experience of a lifetime, it can be a lifelong experience. We find many Fulbrighters will engage initially, then maybe step away and then re-engage, and many others will continue and stay engaged throughout their life. So it is very much a lifelong experience, and that's quite different from many other programs and grants and applications and awards that people would apply. It's very much about a family. And in this way, the family isn't just in Ireland and in the US, but it's actually a global family. So Fulbrighters do engage globally, and there's a number of avenues for them to do it, including Alumni Association and even a specialized Fulbrighter app that allows Fulbrighters to connect with each other. Colin Bradley, who I mentioned, is on the call today. I'm going to ask him to speak in a little while. But Colin has been, is a great example of a Fulbrighter in terms of all of the activities that he's done, not just the work that he's done, but also his engagement with Fulbright in Ireland and Fulbright in the US. And I'll pass it on to Colin shortly, then just talk about his experience. The Irish Awards are open to Irish and EU citizens who have 3 or more years residency in Ireland. We're quite unusual. We buck the trend of other Fulbright commissions in Europe who just offer to their citizens. You should demonstrate a strong rationale for where you're going to in the US. I can't emphasize that enough. That's really a key aspect. It should make sense to you. You must comply with the 2-year home rule for the J1 special J1 visa. So if you come, when you finish your time in the States, you must spend 2 years in Ireland. Really, that only relates to, it'll only have an impact if you then subsequently want to go and get a longer term residency visa in the US, then you would have to adhere to the 2-year home rule. If you don't expect that you're going to spend a long time in the US, then it's not going to impact on you. You cannot be a dual US-Irish citizen. You cannot be living in the US at the time of application, and you cannot have recent extensive experience of studying or living in the US. You can have spent time there before, but it shouldn't be an inordinate time more recently. Again, if you have any specific queries around that, you should reach out to us so we can advise you. The application process, this is an application, and you are, I guess you're selling yourself, and you're selling your work, and you're selling your dreams and your passions and where you want to go to. But the interesting thing is that most applicants and awardees, and I say applicants who didn't necessarily even, who were not successful, have said that it can be a very valuable experience. They've been forced to think about themselves, their passions, where they want to go, what they want to do, how they want to connect, which is quite unlike many other applications that maybe look where you want to talk about the intellectual property you might achieve or the development of your work. So it can be very much through a prism. This is actually very much about, it's more holistic about you, your work, your passions, and where you want to go. So even if you're not successful, or even if you don't ultimately follow through with your application, it's a very useful experience. And we have many applicants who say that it was absolutely worth the effort, and awardees say that it's been very valuable as well for setting them, on their path going forward. So the application timeline will be, we're obviously talking now to give you time to get in place, but from August 30th this year, then they will close on October 31st this year. Technical reviews will happen through November and December. If you're called for interview, that will be in late January, early February. And then in March, we should expect to be able to get back to successful and unsuccessful applicants. So you're planning around that timescale. You should now start reviewing the information on the website. There is a lot there, but I think you should quickly get to where you want to. Choose an award. This isn't always just an obvious thing, so maybe don't immediately go for a specific award that seems to fit, because I'm going to talk a little bit further along, but I think you will find that there are many potential awards that you could potentially apply for. So it's absolutely worth looking through that. Or find a course and plan your research proposal. So if it's a taught course you want to do, or if it's research you want to do in the US, or something you want to teach, consider who and where you want to go to, who you want to work with, and where you want to go to. Also research what Fulbright is about. This is important to us. It is a cultural exchange program, so it's not necessarily just funding of research or teaching or any particular area. And I think because it's fair to say, because we support all disciplines across the board, to some extent we're discipline agnostic. And a point I'm going to come back to again and again is we're very interested in you as a person. Your research area and your passions are important, but we're mostly interested in you and as a person and where all of this comes together. And then register your interest on Fulbright.ie. And I'll give more details at the very of sources, additional sources that will help you. The types of categories, and we have Irish Student Awards, we have Irish Scholar Awards, we have Irish Tech Impact Scholar and Professional Awards, we have Irish FLTA Awards, Irish being a foreign language in the US, so FLTA is Foreign Language Teaching Assistantship. And then there are Fulbright Schumann Awards, and they operate out of the Belgian Commission. They have a slightly different timescale. I'll talk about them shortly. So Fulbright Irish Student Awards, they're typically for postgraduate students in all disciplines. For visiting researchers or degree-seeking students, you must establish your affiliation or apply for a degree or course with the US. It's 4 months, a minimum 4 months, maximum 12 months. We don't have any additional years programs. That's not to say that you couldn't potentially apply for a 2-year program, but Fulbright will just support the first year of that program, or if it was a PhD program for potentially longer than that. Sorry, I'm just trying to move on. Okay. So the Scholar Awards then, it's typically for postdoctoral or professionals in all disciplines. You must have a PhD or 5 years relevant professional experience. You can research or lecture in the United States. Again, we would ask that you establish an affiliation with the US institution. That tends to be reasonably easy because most people, when you contact them in the US, they know about Fulbright, they know why you're applying. And in fact, they'll be a little bit impressed that you are actually applying for a Fulbright award. It's a minimum 3 month and maximum 12 months duration. The Tech Impact Scholar Awards are very special to Ireland, and they're very much about the impact of ICT in potentially in your area, or if you're bringing ICT, your impact of ICT in someone else's area. So you can be both sides of that coin. They're a shorter program, 2 weeks to 3 months. We do tend to advise a month really would be a more appropriate timescale, but technically it could be 2 weeks. And again, you don't have to bring the ICT. You may be looking for the ICT or technology in the US. The Irish FLTA program, then, that's to teach Irish language in the US. You also will get an opportunity to study while you're there. It's typically for 10 months. That's usually the length of the program, the teaching program in the US. You don't need to seek an affiliation. That actually comes through the institutions in the US apply to Fulbright, and then we're able to try and match the successful FLTA awardees with the best opportunity to teach in Irish language in an institution in the US. Our sponsored award, and I mentioned the all disciplines, which can be across the board. Our sponsored awards, to some extent, maybe a little bit more focused. I would say for all of these awards, please do look at the award flyers, but also look at the websites for the different sponsors and understand what their strategy is. I put down a hint there to be innovative, and that's really because you mightn't upfront consider that what you're working on is of any relevance to, for instance, Teagasc or the HRB. But in fact, as we all know and appreciate, there's so much more overlap between technologies and real world examples. So don't immediately assume that that isn't the case, because we and the sponsors are quite interested in people coming from maybe non-typical areas, but bringing and widening the knowledge and bringing their passion to that. So again, just be aware and look at the sponsor awards and consider what the eligibilities might also be for each different award. And I've mentioned some of the awards there. I think just the main point I can say again is that so for the HRB Health Impact Awards, we're looking at health professionals. Again, the area that you might be working on could be very, very broad. We've interesting ones at the Creative Ireland Museum Fellowships with 3 of those. I'll talk about those again. And the NUI Scholar Award is really for early career postdocs. You do have to have an NUI degree at some level to qualify for that. So application requirements then, we're going to look for personal information and CV. And then a personal statement and a Fulbright statement. This is very important because, as I said, we're very interested in you as a person. So we want to find out about you as a person. This can be quite difficult. Typically for the awards and applications, when you're applying for a grant, you don't normally have to write much on this. It's usually more through the prism of the work that you're doing. But we actually want to understand about you and your motivations of why you want to go and what you want to bring back. Your project statement should hold water. It should first of all hold water for you. It should make sense to you, and therefore you should be able to explain it to everybody else who looks at it and understand why this is.
Sorry, I think Dara's connection.
Only 3 recommended. So my connection is gone.
It was briefly there, but I think you're back.
Okay, great. And then where at all possible, a letter of affiliation for when apply for researchers and scholars. There is some leeway there if you would know before you get to an interview stage that we would certainly need to know where you intend to go or that you have support going there. So you're preparing your application again, your research objectives. Why is your work groundbreaking? It might not be if you're doing a taught course, but why is it important in other areas? Your rationale for going to the USA, can't stress that enough. Why couldn't you do this in Germany or some other country? Why does it have to be the USA? And specifically, why going to this particular college or work with these people? So identify the specific areas you concentrate on, explain your research question with objectives, methodology, and expected results. This is all bread and butter for most people on the call. I think probably the harder part is talking about yourself. But then it's what impact will this have on your discipline, your research, and your career? These are little things that you have to consider as well. The personal statement then, it's again reiterating the point, tell us about you personally. It's not you through the prism of the work, but actually about you. Your personal and professional ambitions, your motivations, you know, what drives you, why you want to do this. And then when you come back and you have this opportunity to be part of a global network, what are you going to do with it? So please don't rehash your study objective or your CV. This is really more about you. So it's something a little bit different. Take your time, think about it. Speak to Fulbrighters, people who've done it before. And again, the hint I put down there is we invest in people. So we really want to see the people. We welcome, diversity, inclusion, and equity steps associated with that are in place. But again, we want to see the whole person. So we want to understand everything about you, all aspects of you that make you you. Because that really is the person that then takes this opportunity and represents in the US and comes back to Ireland and represents. So that is many, many things. It's not just through the prism of your work, but it's through the prism of you. Finding a host. Have a look at who are experts in your field. You might already know them or the institutions that you want to go to. I would always say don't necessarily immediately jump to an Ivy League college and say, Fulbright, tick, Ivy League college, tick, job done. In fact, doing that, you really have to explain why you need to go there, why you absolutely need to go. And sometimes you'll have a better experience in what you might consider, you know, not a major city, but it could still be quite big, certainly by Irish standards. I had a great example 2 years ago in Oklahoma City, where I was talking to a representative from the University of Oklahoma City. And I said, well, what's good about that? And the comment came back was, when they thought about it, said, well, we have the most graduates working on Broadway. Well, my expectation would have been, obviously, if you go to a college in NYU or somewhere equivalent, that would be the lead in. But in fact, going to Oklahoma City, you have a better chance of working on Broadway. So it's just an example that not everything comes from a few different, from a few select spaces. Actually, a lot of the US, it's a big country with thousands of institutions. Find the one that's right for you. And sometimes you might have a better experience. You might be more of an Irish rock star Fulbrighter in a non-standard institution than you might have in a small fish in a big pond. So consider that as well. It's really about the experience that you're going to have. It should really make sense to you. So wherever you decide to go, it should make sense to you, and then you should be able to explain it in a sensible way and meaningful way to us and the interviewers, and even then when you go there to understand why you need to go there. Museum fellowships are very interesting. Again, you don't have to identify where you want to go. You do have to get a letter of, sorry, we went back on there. You do need a letter of support from the programs, because you're fitting in with other existing programs they have there. So please do contact the institutions as well. And again, we have for LLM students, law students, we would have with these particular universities, we would have full fee waivers. So if you're considering an LLM, you might consider that you want to go there, and these are guaranteed a full fee waiver. If you are not going there, we would recommend you to seek or discuss with the institutions that you can have a free waiver, because our costs won't necessarily cover the full cost there. In fact, some of the universities we're going to be far short of that, so you need to understand what other supports you might be able to bring for that. If you do apply to the ones we mentioned there, that's straight off, the fee waivers are available to you. And again, with a couple of other associated awards where if you want to go to Florida Polytechnic University, that they would have supports for you there, and the University of Southern California as well would have supports for you. So they are guaranteed supports if you apply through Fulbright. So you put your application in. What happens next? Well, it's review and interview. At a review stage, we take a lot of time to look at obviously the technical aspects from where you come from and where you're going to and what you want to do and does it hold the water. So that's very much the technical. Then we do also at that point still look at the cultural engagement and leadership and your passion and the impacts that it will have as well, and why you want to go to the States and what value that has. When you move to, if you're called to interview, it flips around. So then we're much more interested in the aspects of you and your impacts and where you want to go and what you intend to do there and what you intend to do when you come back to Ireland as well. So all of that is encompassed in your application. But then you, if you're called to interview, then you have to talk a lot more about you as a person and where you want to go. So it's really, as I said before, Fulbright is really about people and your engagement, because it's a great platform, great opportunity for engagement. So we'd like to see that people take, the best advantage of that. I mentioned the Fulbright Schumann Awards. Again, that's really at a higher level of EU-US relations. Big items that relate to the EU and big items that relate to the US. And that's an opportunity for scholars and students to apply for that. It's a separate application that opens in December 2021. If you do apply for that, please advise us that you have applied for that as well. And we can obviously advise, but please also advise us that you have applied. I'm going to stop at this point and introduce Colin, who's very patiently sat and waited to be called in just to talk about his experience and his support for Fulbright. So Colin, thank you very much. I'm going to pass over control for your presentation as well, for your slide. You're on mute.
So okay. So thanks, Dara, and you're going to enable me to share my screen. Is that right?
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen just there. There should be a share screen down at the bottom there.
Yep. There. So. Okay. So.
Perfect.
Yeah, very good. So as I just tell you, first of all, a little bit about myself, and then I'll tell you a bit about the process of say, applying for and what happened before getting the award, and then how I got on since doing the award, and I'll finish up then a few tips from just that I've learned from my experience of going through the process of applying for a Fulbright award. So just in relation to myself, my background is I'm a GP, or what in America they call a family doctor. Prior to coming to UCC, I worked in Manchester and then in Birmingham, and I've been in UCC now for the past 24 years in a position as Professor of General Practice in the medical school at UCC, but I also continue to work in general practice in the north side of Cork City. And my doctoral work, which goes right back a good while ago now, I was on comfortable prescribing. And I must confess, I concur with Dara, the process of applying for the Fulbright Award gave me an opportunity to think about and reflect on what had been the underpinning theme of my research right back to when I did my PhD. And I realized that what I've been looking at over all the years were not just uncomfortable prescribing, but areas of prescribing by doctors or GPs where there was some problem or issues that are make the prescribing a little difficult. So related to that, I've done projects, for example, in antimicrobial prescribing, on benzodiazepine prescribing, and for example, in polypharmacy or prescribing multiple drugs. When it came to choosing to go, to apply for Fulbright and choosing the project that I proposed, and I should mention that I was on a Scholar Award, and Scholar Awards can be for teaching or research or a mixture, but I went for a research award, as it were, and that did simplify things because then I could focus on preparing a research proposal along the lines that I've been preparing proposals for many years. So a couple of people that were influential in that decision and where I ended up going. The first is the lady on the left here, Professor Lizelle Benfield, and she's the Dean of Nursing School in University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. And I met her actually in UCC. So she was in UCC as a Fulbright scholar coming from the US to colleagues in the nursing school. And I'd been mulling over the idea of, as I say, Fulbright for some time, but talking to Lizelle, she encouraged me very strongly and hopes to help me make connections to progress things with colleagues in the US. Another person then who was influential in my formulating my proposal was the chap next to her, which is Vice Admiral Dr. Rafika Murthy, who was the Surgeon General of the United States, and in fact, I think since come back into that position. And he had highlighted a problem they were having in the US with the prescribing of opioid medications. These are drugs related to morphine, and he described what he described as an opioid epidemic. And that related in many ways to the kind of work that I've been doing around problematic areas of prescribing. Now, I was already aware of the next chap here, Professor Jim Mould, who was Professor of Family and Preventive Medicine in the University of Oklahoma. I knew him, interesting enough, because he had done some collaborative work with colleagues in the European General Practice Research Workshop, of which I am a member. And so I knew of his work in Oklahoma, particularly around formulating a network of general practices that are involved in research. So I knew there was a sort of a suitable, like a substrate there where I could do my research. But when it came to formulating my proposal, in fact, Jim had retired and his position was now occupied by this guy, Zsolt Nagykaldi. And he was extremely helpful, actually. I made contact with him via Lizelle and worked with him on putting together a proposal that would have some relevance and interest to what was going on in Oklahoma at the time, and also what was going on in Ireland and indeed in Europe around prescribing of these drugs. So, this is where I ended up then, which is the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. Now, the main university campus for the University of Oklahoma is actually in a town called Norman, which is about 20 or 30 miles south of Oklahoma City. But the medical school and the medical sciences are in the city itself. And the research proposal that we brought together was around opioid prescribing, as I say, and we again gave it an acronym. It's always good to have an acronym. So we called this the ROPE study, this Reducing Opioid Prescribing Through Education and Support. And again, along the lines that Dara was saying about how this can lead to an ongoing collaboration, there's actually a ROPES 2 study progressing, which I am part of, but it's being continued by colleagues that I met in Oklahoma when I was there. And this is just a few reminders to myself about what you need before you go. So on the left here, just remind me of the personal statement. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment as well. But as Dara has also mentioned, this is possibly the more challenging thing that one has to prepare in terms of one's application. Preparing the research proposal, as I said, was relatively straightforward and along the lines of other proposals that I drafted before. But this personal statement, as I say, was quite different and a little bit different. And just as a reminder to myself how it was made a little bit different, I also cited Seamus Heaney, which isn't the kind of thing you'd normally do in a research grant or research proposal. And the other thing that Dara also mentioned was the need to get a letter of affiliation from the institution. And again, you can see that I had one from my colleague, Zsolt Nagykaldi, and indeed his head of department, Steve Crawford, before I went. And then on the right here, just reminded that before I went, there was also a very helpful and indeed absolutely essential get together in Dublin before going to Oklahoma. So I went to Oklahoma in August 2018, and there was a meeting for all the scholars, a briefing session over 2 days actually for scholars in June before I went. And again, that's part of the thing that you need to plan for, that there will be a couple of days preparation before one leaves the country. The other thing, just to remind you as well, is just the long lead-in. So basically, as I say, I started thinking about this probably in the mid-2010s, but made my application in 2016-17 and went to Oklahoma in 2018. So there is, so it's important to recognize it takes a good while, and you need to be planning well in advance to get all the steps, through all the steps. So this, say, is Oklahoma City, and essentially Dara would mention that as a sort of somewhat atypical place for scholars to go. But as I say, it's a fantastic city. You can see here there's the Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial. The big, large building here at the bottom is a Museum of American History. And obviously, Oklahoma is interesting as well, and it's the state with the largest proportion of indigenous Native Americans. And of course, that's partly to do with the history of the state having previously been identified as native lands and then subsequently occupied by Europeans as well. And again, next slide. Yeah, this is just some more views of well, the bottom of here, just some really attractive places around the state. So again, one gets an opportunity, say, to see, and from my point of view, certainly to see parts of America that I wouldn't have previously seen. I've been to America several times before, both to the East Coast and the West Coast, but to see this Middle America was certainly new and different. Something else that Dara touched on was just the opportunity to have other cultural exchange and events. So one of the things that might be offered as a scholar or a student in the as a Fulbright would be what they call enrichment seminars. So when I was there, I was invited to enrichment seminar. It took place in Huntsville and Birmingham in Alabama. And again, these were a fantastic opportunity, because at that enrichment seminar, not only did we meet other American institutions, people from other American institutions, and also encountered all sorts of other fields of study that I wouldn't be familiar with, but it was also an opportunity to meet other Fulbright scholars from other parts of the world. And I think there were scholars from about 40 or 50 different countries all over the world that were at that enrichment seminar as well. And that was really a high point of the whole experience. So I strongly recommend that if you do get the opportunity, first of all, if you're successful in your application and you get an opportunity to attend an enrichment seminar, don't pass it up. It's really, as I say, a high point of the whole thing. And then just to say that having, as I got the opportunity to work with colleagues in the US, then have subsequently had many opportunities actually to present this work both in the US and elsewhere. So before leaving, for example, I was invited to make a presentation to colleagues in the medical school, and they were particularly interested in not only sort of what I'd learned about what was going on in the US, but also to give some perspective on how healthcare works in Europe, and then how we are encountering, or perhaps not encountering, the opioid crisis. So that was, as I say, one of many opportunities that I had. I also presented to the local medical board who regulate doctors in Oklahoma, which again was a very interesting opportunity, because they were very keen to know how they could handle, or how they could reduce the problems of excessive opioid prescribing by their doctors. And subsequent to that, then shortly after coming back to Ireland, actually, I then went to present the work at the North American Primary Care Research Group, Chicago. And in fact, most recently, I presented more of this work and some of the work that's coming out of the follow-on study at a European conference that took place virtually last December in Germany. At that presentation, I entitled "The US Opioid Crisis, Let's Not Go There." So just, as I say, some tips then from my experience of going through the whole process. And again, it concurs very much with what Dara's been flagging to you. It's really the process of application is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity you need to avail of to reflect on who you are, and as I said, what your passions are, and not just sort of what you are. So again, the focus is on you as a person over and above you as an academic. It is again important to think carefully about what you hope to get out of the Fulbright Award, and what your hosts and the Fulbright family will get from you. So, as I said, the opioid thing was ideal, because it's something where clearly there's learning to be had by my going to where they had a much bigger problem with this type of prescribing that we do have here. But also, I knew before I went, and from preparatory work, that it's potentially an emerging scenario in Europe as well. We have an increasing prescribing of opioids, and particularly strong opioids in Europe, not on the scale they have in America, but we're certainly drifting in the same direction. And so it was useful to come back and say, look, this is where we don't want to go, and how we might prevent getting into the same kind of problems with these drugs that they have in the US. So as I say, in terms of what you're offering to your hosts and indeed to the Fulbright family, it is very much this thing of Irishness, which of course is a very diverse concept, but Irish people have some unique qualities and some interesting cultural background, which is of interest to, say, our colleagues, not just in the US, but also other colleagues that one will meet from other countries who are part of the Fulbright family. And then, as I say, since coming back, I've taken on this role as a Fulbright ambassador, which has also been very useful in terms of interacting with colleagues within UCC and guiding them as they go through the process. As I say, and I know I've been reiterating this several times, but the personal statement is something that needs to be truly personal. And again, that's something you probably need to consult with people about, including other Fulbright alumni. As I said, there's quite a long lead in, so start preparation as early as possible. And when it comes to drafting both your proposal, if it's a research proposal or your teaching proposal, and also particularly your personal statement, it's about writing and rewriting and getting reviews from critical friends, etc. Again, reinforcing the point that Darren made, certainly it was noted to me that Irish applicants tend to focus perhaps on the East Coast, particularly Boston, New York. But my experience is that these are not the only places in America where Irish are welcome. So when it comes to looking for institutions, keep your research pretty broad and look at places that are, say, not quite so, well, it's not quite so well known, shall we say, this side of the Atlantic. And again, I encourage you very strongly to just go for it. It's not just about getting the Fulbright Award, but also about other experiences that one can have from traveling to the States. And even the experience of, as I say, reflecting on your life and your work is no harm either. So that's it.
Thanks, Colin. If you stop sharing, then I'll pick up again.
And just to say that I'm happy to take any questions now. Yeah.
Perfect. I was going to ask you, well, my one question to you was, did you feel like a rock star being an Irish Fulbrighter scholar in Oklahoma City?
Not so much a rock star, but certainly a person of great interest. And lots of different people wanted to hear from me, wanted to know about, how life is in Ireland, how healthcare is in Ireland, and and also then what I thought of their opioid situation. So there were lots of interest and lots of invitations to meet with different groups throughout the university. And as time went on and it became known, that's how the invitation, for example, to the medical board came about, that I'd done a couple of presentations in the university, and then someone got in touch with me from the medical board, said, will you come and talk to us?
Yeah, excellent. By the way, your tip slide is very good. We could probably it's on every point. So I think because you've gone through it, that you're aware. So it's not just me saying, but it's somebody who's gone through it is reflecting it back. So I think that's very useful. Thank you. I'm going to take over then again, just on the moving on. So primarily, I guess the discussion today has been about Irish applicants for a Fulbright program, but as we know, it's binational, so it comes in two directions. I think Colin mentioned a very interesting aspect that in discussions with Lizelle, who was a US scholar, actually lovely person. She was an excellent Fulbrighter, and we still engage with her actually. Through a number of different programs, but I think that proves the point as well. That this kind of engagement, it feeds off itself. So this type of engagement, it can have long-lasting effects and lifetime of impacts as well. So it was interesting to know that it was Lizelle discussing with her. That was one of the catalysts to kind of make you finally decide to go ahead with it. So talking about colleagues, then bringing US colleagues to Ireland, there's a number of opportunities for that through US Student Awards. So US students can apply on all disciplines, and they may choose to come to UCC and can be encouraged to come to UCC. there are specific awards that UCC actually have and for students coming here. So we've had a different variety of specific awards over the years. US Scholars is the same idea, that they can apply for the all disciplines, or there might be a very specific award that the institution or department can set up to encourage US Scholars to come. The US Specialist Award tends to be more at an institutional level, where an institution recognizes there's an area that they would like to invest in and maybe seek experts in the US to come over for a shorter period and maybe an ongoing continuation of that program. And that's where the institution essentially applies to the commission, seeks out somebody in the US who's either on a roster, or we can help our colleagues in the US can help find who might best fit. One good thing about it is, because for most US academics, having a Fulbright or doing a Fulbright is on their bucket list. So it tends to be an easier opportunity to approach them and say, would you like to come to our institution under a Fulbright program, and we're applying for it on your behalf. So that can be quite positive. There are scholar awards as well, where US scholars might come to Ireland and go to one or two other countries as well. And then the Fulbright Schumann Awards is the same thing. You have US students and US scholars who can apply to come to Ireland. So again, being Fulbright aware and being maybe a little bit proactive in terms of promoting your interest as an institution or department in terms of Fulbright can have very positive benefits. I've kind of gone through the comments here, so I don't need to reiterate them. So really then just coming back to all of the stuff we spoke about today, either as an Irish going to the US, or if you want to encourage US applicants to come to the Cork and UCC, there are key things that you can do. I think one of the most important ones actually is talk to a Fulbrighter, and you have a Fulbrighter and a campus ambassador here today. There are a number of others, Fulbrighters in UCC as well. And Colin, or if you go onto our website, you can find those people as well. Colin can advise you as well. Certainly follow us on social media to get a flavour for what we do. Obviously go on to Fulbright.ie. That contains a lot of information and some narratives and information from other people who have done it. Also have a little wider look at the Fulbright ethos, and understand, is this something you want to be connected with? We don't necessarily fund people who are working on Fulbright ethos, because we're funding across all disciplines. But in terms of what you can get from it, it's very, very useful and important. And it's a global platform that gives you an opportunity to pick up in as much detail as you wish, or as little as you wish, but understand what that opportunity is for that. Start thinking about where you might want to go and why you might want to go there, and consider that. So I think I've really said everything that I want to say at this point. Again, we want to encourage everybody to apply. Not necessarily, not everybody will get the award, that's an unfortunate thing, but there's a lot of value to the path getting here, and the same information can be used for lots of other things, including CVs and potentially for other award programs that you might apply to. But, if there are any undergraduates on the call at the moment today, even if it's not something you want to do immediately, it's great if you start thinking about this, because these are the kind of conversations you should be having with yourself, and this is the kind of information you should be thinking about, whether it's Fulbright or it's something else that you might apply to. For scholars and academics and tenured academics on the call today, I would say, there's two hats you can wear. One is obviously your own hat, and consider where you want to go. Colin, kind of alluded to it a little bit, but a lot of US academics who come to Ireland say that one of the biggest benefits they got was that they had to consider outside of the rut and that they're in, the streamline that they're in, and consider themselves. And then once they got to Ireland, they had time to breathe and consider in a wider category and mingle with other people that they wouldn't typically have met with, and that's been incredibly valuable. And aside from the really interesting network opportunities that generated, just the personal opportunities for them and their families, so it's the same opportunity, for Irish scholars who want to go to the States. All of that is there. And as Colin said, he got an opportunity to meet with so many more people than he would typically have met if he'd just been going to a conference or on a typical award. So we're very we're very much open to people applying. Just as a small piece of trivia, I received my PhD from UCC some decades ago. So I'd be obviously very supportive of UCC applicants applying. So I think I'll finish at that point. Have any?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions there, Dara. So someone has asked, how common is it for, let's say, two members of the same family to apply for a Fulbright award?
We had a fantastic success actually on that a couple of years ago. We had Ruth and Rita Amelia to apply, and Ruth was the daughter who was applying as a scholar, and Rita was was her mother who was completing her PhD. So she was applying as a student, and both were successful. So it was a great story. We do tend to see generational applications as well. I got to the point of 3 generations certainly, and then there's the occasional Fulbright marriage that comes from that as well. So it's not a barrier to application if somebody else in your family is applying. To some extent, you're not necessarily going to push each other over the line. So it's each on their own merits, but it's absolutely fine to do that, and we've had some great examples of that. As to how common it is, probably not that common, but that's just more happenstance rather than any design.
Just on that point, I might mention that my wife came with me to the US, and again, just to say, Fulbright were very helpful in terms of visa applications and so forth. But there are other things you need to be aware of. For example, the health and accident insurance that I had didn't cover her, so we obviously instructed how to get some health insurance for her. That's very important. One of the things that I would say on reflection, we probably didn't prepare as much as we might have done for what she would do when she was there. So I think you need to give some consideration to that as well. If a spouse is coming with you, they need to think of what they might be able to do if they're there, as I say, as a spouse of a Fulbrighter. But again, the Fulbright do help with visas. The fact the visa that you get as the Fulbrighter is a J1, and your spouse then comes on what's called a J2. So if you're looking for what the conditions are around surrounding their visa, it's a J2 visa.
And we just had another one in there, and I think David O'Connell is going to join very briefly at the end just to say a few words. But so another one was, what are the ratios between health sciences, maybe tech, law versus the kind of arts subjects?
Wow, what a question. In any one year across 75 years or across years of Irish, I think, I'm taking a broad stab at this because it really does vary every year. I'd say you're probably looking at, 50-50. I'm kind of guessing at this. It's going to depend on what you want, how you define that. The FLTA awards, which are obviously not going to be science or language, I skew that awards a little bit as well, because we would have anything from 8 to 10 of those. So it does depend on the particular areas. But I would have said 50-50 if you wanted to say arts and humanities versus tech science.
I forgot to mention that I was on one of these special awards. Mine was a HRB Health Impact Award, which is a sort of a co-sponsor or a sponsored award. And the advantage, I think, of the sponsored awards from the point of view of applicants in general is that it does, first of all, increase the number of awards available. And secondly, it probably reduces the competition so that the health and tech people and so on tend to be competing with each other. And that probably leaves more scope for the ones that aren't sponsored, shall we say, the ones that are in more general fields.
Actually, and Colin, you touch on a question that sometimes comes up where people ask, is it better to go for an all disciplines or a sponsored award? And the answer is swings and roundabouts. The all disciplines, we probably will fund more of them, but again, a lot more people apply, so there's a greater level of competition. But you might be the unique person who's applying on that. If you apply as Colin did under the health impact, you're competing against your direct peers. So there's swings and roundabouts there. David, are you coming on to speak?
Yeah, David, do you want to unmute there if you're joining? And you should be able to there. Oh yeah, perfect.
Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see it here. You there?
Yeah, apologies. Actually, I was a bit late joining. I had my computer crashed, so I'm actually using a phone at the moment. So if it works, that's great. But look, I just for those who are on the call, you don't know me, I'm David O'Connell, Director of UCC Research Support Services, and it's a real pleasure on behalf of UCC Research Support Service to welcome Dara. And for Colin as well for his words of wisdom on the program, and Rowan for you for organising it all. Yeah, and it's just to, you know, I've learned a lot from the presentation, the focus on the personal statement, you know, and you know, aligned with the whole principle of Fulbright being about bringing people together, really, you know. And those tips around preparing early, again, I really emphasize that point, you know, and that's the same true of all funding applications. You know, the earlier you start, the earlier you make those connections, the better you'll be. And you know, there's no advantage to leaving it to the last minute. That never works, you know. And that input from and getting input and advice from previous awardees, I think, is a really important point as well. And that's something that we can help with. We can help you with, you know, for people who are listening or interested in applying. That's something we can help you with at Research Support Services. We can sort of make those connections for you and help you with that. So. And with just generally with the application process, you know. And finally, the point you made actually, Dara, about getting US students and scholars, it's a great opportunity, I think, to get really eminent and good, you know, US based scholars and students into UCC, and being very proactive about that, I think, is a key message. And that, you know, that's something we can you know, enable and facilitate, you know, as an institution, rather than hope that good people want to come to UCC. So we go out and go after them, you know, and really target them. So that's what I certainly picked up with it. But it's been, just again to reiterate my thanks to you, Darren, and to Colin, to Rowan for the presentation today. And as I say, we in Research Support Services are here to help people who are willing to or want to engage with the program. So thanks a million.
Thank you, David, for all your help organising this.
Ron, I just finished with a couple of comments, and thanks, David, and thanks to everybody on the call, and thanks, Colin. Hopefully next year we'll actually be able to come down in person. I do enjoy coming down and meeting people, and then the discussion afterwards to, you know, were questions that people maybe didn't want to ask on the forum, and I'm sure you do have, so please do reach out to us. Obviously there's a lot of information on the website, but if there's a question that you're not sure or you're not finding the answer, please reach out to us, and sooner rather than later. And hopefully next year anyway, we'll be there in person. So there's a greater opportunity, I guess, to discuss everything and maybe meet with other stakeholders as well. So that's something we look forward to in the next year. Famous last words, hopefully not.
And just to say, I'm happy to be contacted as well. My email is c.bradley@ucc.ie, or even more simply, I have an alternative at gp@ucc.ie.
Perfect. And I will be sending around a link to this video and the slides afterwards. And in that email, Colin, Dara, and I will be CC'd in that. So you can get in touch with us there. Thank you to everyone for attending.